Okay, this is Greg Kesich at the Portland Press Herald, and I'm here with the Brain Trust, the Sunday lineup, Bill Nemitz, Alan Caron, and Cynthia Dill. And there's a lot going on right now, and the legislature's back in town and back in Augusta, and they have already started with a little bit of conflict with the governor's office. Just the summoning of the lawmakers and swearing them in has already caused some conflict. And one of the first issues that they seem to be fighting over will be the placement of a forensic unit outside for people assigned to Riverview who by a court, either because they're they're not criminally responsible, or they are not competent to stand trial. And it's a issue that's been boiling over for a couple of years, and the executive department has a solution and should be problem solved, right?
Supposedly.
So what's
but
going
it isn't.
on?
Well, I think it's the end result of a couple of years of dysfunction in terms of, the executive's ability to get the job done in a way that satisfies the federal overseers, among others, and also in a way that involves the legislature. And clearly in this case, the legislature feels like they are not involved, and they want to be. And it's largely an executive function, but it's also, I think, in a bigger picture, an example of yet another case where the branches of government are not acting cooperatively, and they're not going to, from the looks of it.
And another perfect illustration of why this administration can't get much done, can't get anything done. I mean, something as simple as we're going to build this structure that everyone agrees needs to be built. Something as simple as cooperating with, advising the legislature, and getting their stamp of approval can't be done, because once again the governor's locked up in his vendettas, and I'm going to keep the legislature out, I'm going to do this without anybody knowing what's going to happen, it's all ours, stay away. Hello, when's this going to stop?
2 years from now.
2 years from now.
I thought it was interesting. Well, first I should disclose that I do have a case against Riverview, so I'll just talk about the politics of it. I thought it was interesting that the Democrats kind of came to the table with a fight that they could theoretically win for the first time in a while, where they uncovered this law that says the Legislative Council has to give approval. But what I think they failed to do was anticipate the governor's next move, and that's where I think Democrats fall short politically, is that they may have, sort of exercise their muscle, or whatever the expression is, but then he comes back and says, he's going to put it in Freeport, which of course is a personal dig against Sarah Gideon. I mean, hopefully it was in fun, and they're, just sort of setting the stage for what's going to be a difficult session. But I hope that the Democrats in the legislature are really careful about what fights they're going to pick, because too often they pick fights with the governor and they lose, and it just makes them look weak.
But that one, Cynthia, I think Democrats should be happy to let the governor go try to put a facility in Freeport or Bangor or Southern Maine and pay an additional $1 million. I mean, if that's what the governor is prepared to do in order to not advise people in the legislature of what he's doing, they should be.
It's not just another $1 million. It might be another 2 years, which they're losing $20 million a year in federal funding. And none of this ever seems to come back on the governor. It's all the government in general that looks like it's not functioning, and that kind of feeds into his message and his. And
it plays into his mantra that the legislature, the lawmakers, are preventing me from doing what I was elected to do, and whether that's true or not, in this day and age becomes irrelevant, because it's a very clear message, easy for a lot of people to get their heads around. And when the Democrats and the Leadership Council invokes this, again, as you said, this rather obscure law to say we have the power to stop this, it boomerangs, because he just comes back and says they're looking, scratching and clawing for every piece of legislative obstructionism they can find. Whether that's the case or not, the end result is he always seems to walk away winning these things.
Right. I'm not sure this is the right fight just because of that, because he doesn't have to actually build a building and put people in it and get the federal funding to win.
Exactly. Well, and
Yeah.
I don't know why we're not focusing on why there's $3 to $5 million just sloshing around in the governor's budget with it is not subject to any oversight. I mean, it just strikes me as really odd that they can just find $3 to $5 million to build a psychiatric facility without an appropriation by the legislature. I mean,
Yeah.
that to me is the story, but
Yeah,
nobody
yeah.
seems carried about that.
So what's your sense? What do you think the next couple of years are going to look like with this governor and, this legislature and
I personally think that the governor has had a taste of national politics and that he's intoxicated by it, and that he is going to make the next 2 years all about what comes next for Paul LePage. And he's going to be running for U.S. Senate or some other national position. And so it's just going to be sort of a continuation of what we tasted in the presidential election, which is kind of gross.
I think the 2018 Senate race begins now. And I think if you think we saw a lot of Donald Trump while Donald Trump was running, wait and see what happens when Paul LePage is running for a U.S. Senate seat, because he's yet to get his coveted Trump administration appointment. But that said, if he runs for the U.S. Senate, and I'm convinced he's going to, considering the work that he did for Trump in the presidential campaign, I think that will come back to him in a big way. So we'll be seeing a lot of the Donald over the next couple of years. That's my prediction.
so we have.
I think within the legislature, just the political future aside for a moment, I don't see this governor being able to do anything. I mean, he could barely do anything in the last 4 years, certainly the last 2. But I think he'll be the lame duck with the least power that we've ever seen. I think he can make these fights and these spats, and it will be a challenge for Democrats to out-message him. But I don't think he's going to promote anything that will become law. I don't think he'll be able to stop many of the things he wants to stop. I think the legislature is just going to continue to operate as a somewhat independent entity trying to figure out its way forward.
First find 2/3 and then proceed.
Right.
Find a 2/3
Exactly.
majority and do what they want.
I want to go back to the Senate race for a second, though, because I think it's worth pointing out that there is somebody in that Senate seat, and he's a kind of a political legend in this state.
Who was a governor.
Former governor, who has been able to, drum up big vote totals in three-way races. Is that going to stop LePage?
Oh, absolutely. I think Governor LePage is going to be surprised when his record of, increased child poverty, reduced ranks in various business climate, tests or, these Forbes business climate. He has no record of accomplishment, and Angus King does. And Angus King is a very good communicator, and so I think Governor LePage is going to meet his match when it comes to the soundbite, because, Angus King was a TV personality in addition to being a governor, and it's all a question really of what the Democrats are going to do.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that we underestimate Paul LePage's appeal as a statewide candidate. The Democrats do at their own peril, because I think he's already demonstrated against widespread expectations that he can win a statewide race, and he's done it twice. I agree with you, Cynthia. I think Angus King is certainly the most formidable candidate he will have ever faced, but Angus King is also a smart guy. And if I'm Angus King right now, I'm looking at 2018 and starting on the premise that this is not going to be a cakewalk, that LePage brings that infamous, whatever percentage you want to attach to it, low 40s, whatever, base with him to this election, and it all comes down to whether or not it's a three-way race or a two-way race.
But one other thing I think that's going to be going against Governor LePage is, it's 2018, is that 2 years into the presidential calendar when usually, so since Donald Trump and the Republicans had a big red wave in 2016, I think history shows that Democrats have a chance in 2018 to make up a little ground, because usually that's when the party usually does the best.
Usually.
Yeah.
Right. Except for presidential years when
Right.
the other time Democrats do
I don't.
well.
It's hard to say. I think all those cyclical patterns that we all expect, presidential year, midterms, whatever. I wonder if a lot of that's just been thrown out the window. I feel a lot less confident in that stuff going forward from this recent election
Yeah, I think
than I ever have before.
To build on your point about LePage, I think he has had the luck of the draw twice.
He has, yes, that's true.
He's not going to have the luck of the draw with Angus King. I mean, Angus King was the outsider before outsider was cool. I mean, he's not the classic Democratic opponent that LePage can enjoy defeating. He's a guy who's also from the outside. He's very articulate and he's very smart. And I think that's going to be a tough one for LePage. I don't think Angus or anybody should underestimate.
No, I think in a two-way race, Angus wins hands down.
Yeah.
But if
Exactly.
the Democrats
Depends on what the Democrats
field a candidate, and if it's not a sacrificial lamb, such as the ones we used to see run against Angus King for governor, who might pull in 12, 13% of the vote. Yet even in that case, that 12 or 13% could be critical.
I think there's going to
Elliot
be
Cutler only had 8.
I think there's going to be a
Elliot
serious.
Cutler only had 8
second
running
time.
against LePage. Yeah.
Which I
think
might
there
know
will
it was
be a-
less than what I got running
Yes.
against Angus King, just for the record.
I think there will be a serious
And I think Tom
debate
Connolly also
within the
did
Democratic Party over whether to put forward a nominee or not. I think that will be a very
That's going to be very
serious-
interesting to watch.
Yeah, that's what I think is the big
conversation.
question. And,
Yeah.
and what kind of
And
negotiation takes place
and
around that?
in the course of that conversation, there will be a great erosion of prominent Democrats, I will predict, that will early on go to Angus. And that's going to accelerate the conversation of is the party putting up somebody and for what reason?
Right. Well, it's a damned if you do and damned if you don't proposition for them, because if they do, well, then they'll obviously be accused of ushering Paul
Yeah.
LePage into the Senate. If they don't, it opens them up to, has the main Democratic Party fallen apart so badly that they can't even field a legitimate Senate candidate anymore? So it's a tough decision.
Yeah, but the thing, though, is people, I think, assume that the Democratic Party has some control over people running as a Democrat
True.
in the U.S. Senate race, and they don't. And people who aspire to political positions have egos and ambition, which I think is fine, and they're not going to get permission from some, 25-year-old who's working in the Democratic Party office. So I think that it's foolish for people to think that there's some man behind the curtain controlling the Democratic Party. It really is people who are interested in politics. Look at Donald Trump. He came storming into the Republican Party. He ran as a Democrat. Bernie Sanders, Trump
But
ran as a
Democrats
Republican.
don't have to have a primary. The primary is a process through which the party selects its nominee. It can decide to select a nominee in another way and then nominate Angus King, which is what happens, as I understand it, in Vermont. with
Wow,
Bernie
that would take a
Sanders.
lot of organizing between now and then for the party to change all of the. There's rules, there's a platform, there's a committee. It's a process. That seems to me
Yeah.
impossible.
Well, that's going to be the
I read some
conversation.
this axiom that I can't remember now where I read it, who said it, but I owe somebody credit for this. Who said that we're in an era of really strong partisanship and weak parties, and the parties don't have any control over who their nominees are, but people come home and vote with the party on the party line as much as they ever did when parties were strong. And that's certainly a Donald Trump phenomena, and it's something that the parties are going to have to look at going forward because.
Well, I think not only the parties have to look at it. I think these independent people have to look at it. I feel that independents, so-called, who think they're cool, not aligning with the party, are largely to blame for the political climate right now. They check out at the primary. They somehow feel self-righteous about their, continuing ability to force people like LePage and Donald Trump into political seats.
And so Democrats given that logic, would then do this very same thing in an Angus King LePage race. They would be the dreaded spoilers that they've been attacking for.
Or Angus King could just maybe run as a Democrat since he.
I just don't think.
But whatever, he doesn't have to.
I think that's the obvious solution. But given how firmly he stood on that over the past several years, or a lot more than that, I'd be very, very surprised to see him
Me too.
suddenly lurch toward the Democratic Party. I think he's built his whole identity on this.
I
Yes,
don't
exactly.
think Angus is going to become a Democrat any more than Bernie
Right,
Sanders became
right,
a Democrat
right.
in Vermont. But the Democrats endorsed Bernie Sanders
Yes,
because
right,
they didn't want to be the spoilers in that race, and he was close enough
Right.
philosophically. Now, in Angus's case, of course, he caucuses with the Democrats. He's an independent. He will be. I mean, he'd be shocked if he ever changed, but.
Yeah, I
We'll
think
see. I mean, it'll be an interesting process. And, it's good to remember that Angus King was a Democrat. He was blocked as a nominee by the Democrats' propensity to continually nominate somebody who's been around 30 years. That was Joe Brennan. I was involved in that race against Angus King. And that's the only reason Angus King.
I think what you're saying is he
the
couldn't win a
Democratic
primary.
primary process would never support him, and he was right. So he decided to become an independent. So the blame is not the ego of the independent entirely. It's the process of primary selection that narrows the field. And if you're not within that, if you don't follow the orthodoxy, you don't get through that process.
I don't know. I disagree with that. I think a primary election is something you have to win. I mean, it's an election like any other election. There's no special people coming in. You have to get out people to show up and vote for you. And
Well, we'll see how the ranked choice voting, if it's up and running by then, affects that, because that will also control primaries.
I'd be surprised if it is. I think that, although it's interesting how little we've heard about it since, but for example, I wonder, if and when Maine is going to confront this constitutional issue that has been raised but not certainly resolved at this point.
Yeah.
And if in fact there is a constitutional impediment currently to implementing ranked choice voting, I don't think there's any way it will be ready in time for the 2018 election, because we'll have to go through that.
Well, it would have to be
a
on the ballot,
contentious
probably.
process. Yeah, it'd have to be on the
Yeah.
ballot. You got to get past the
Yeah.
legislature. That's a long haul to change the Constitution.
But it would take a 2/3 vote from the legislature.
Right.
And does the governor have to sign a constitutional amendment? No, right?
No.
Is it just the legislature?
But that's a big jump to say that. I mean, it's been flagged that there may be a constitutional
Right.
problem, but until a judge or court adjudicates it, there's
and-
not. And I just, as I said in another one of these talks, I just don't see who has standing to challenge it right now. So
Right.
it'll.
So maybe
it's gonna
that's
make
why
very
there
interesting.
hasn't
So
been
does
much
that
talk
mean we
about
have
it,
to
'cause-
have an election? I mean, the nightmare scenario for me is you have a three-way election for Senate, and it resolves in a certain way under these new rules, and then it's challenged in court, and the court says that was unconstitutional.
That's the first
You have
time
to-
it gets in front of a
You have
judge.
to count it in the
Yeah,
old
I
way,
think-
and all these people assumed it was being counted as a ranked choice vote, so they.
I think somebody could go in and argue that there will be irreparable harm if ranked choice voting takes place at the election, so it would be like a higher standard in the legal sense. But I just don't know. I'm curious to see who's going to do that.
Could someone request an advisory opinion of the law court on this? Could Matt Dunlap say, as the officer
Legislature
charged with
could.
administering Maine's elections?
Yeah,
Yeah.
or the governor. But
mean,
even that would be
It wouldn't necessarily have to be an actual court case that finds its way up there. I think it wouldn't surprise me. And Matt, he's a pretty practical guy. And at some point, I'm wondering if, as Secretary of State, he might just say, "Hold the phone. I'm in charge. My responsibility is to execute these elections. Before I go down this road, justices of the court, would you please advise me?"
Yeah, and that would be a really good political thing for Matt Dunlap to do. Because
Yeah.
right now the national spotlight is on Maine because of ranked choice voting. The New York Times had an article just the other day about it. There's interest, and so that would put him right in the spotlight, which, as you know, most politicians like to be in.
So
Defending democracy at the same time.
Exactly.
I think we need to move off 2018 because it's making me queasy. I can't believe. I feel like I've just, I'm still hungover from 2016, and so we. I think you said, Alan, that we need to find out what the legislature can get 2/3 on, and that's going to be the sort of guiding principle going forward. What can the legislature get 2/3 on these days?
I think it was Bill.
Oh, well, they're going to have to do it on a budget.
They'll have to. Yeah.
And I mean,
There's one.
Yeah, I mean, LePage has already signaled. He's going for the income tax cut without the sales tax cut this time around, and I think one of the reasons you're not hearing a lot of horrified reaction to that is because everybody knows it's dead out of the gate. Right. So there's that, and it will be interesting to see if there's any kind of tinkering with the tax code, to placate him or to placate his supporters in the legislature, his base. I don't know, but I don't think the tax issue is dead necessarily, but I think there's that. I think that first and foremost is what faces them going into this session. And then there are the referendum questions, which also, are going to be implemented whether the governor likes it or not, from the looks of it.
Is there 2/3 support, or do you think most people agree that there should be more money for schools?
No.
No.
I don't think more people are going to agree that there should be more money for schools. I don't. I think that a lot of people believe that schools are adequately funded. It's just that the resources aren't used wisely, and that's why the appeal to reduce the number of superintendents was popular with Governor Baldacci, and now it's popular with Paul LePage, because it's actually it's a good thing to talk about why Maine has so many high-level administrators in the education. But when it comes down to it, I just don't. Maybe education never seems to be a priority in the final moments, because there aren't a lot of kids who should come, who show up and advocate for themselves at the State House.
It seemed like everybody I talked to on both sides of question 2 referendum, even the no's, said, we agree that there should be more money for schools, but this is a blunt instrument. That we don't like the way this raises taxes. We don't like the way it allocates the money. The money should be more focused on the neediest kids. There was a lot of reasons to vote no against it that weren't what you just said, that the schools have enough money, they just don't use it wisely. And I'd be surprised that legislators who, I think everybody's got a school district, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think anybody doesn't have a school district, and they would hear that debate and come back and say that schools have enough money.
Well, I think what happens is that Governor LePage argues effectively to a lot of Republicans and conservatives that it's the teachers' unions that are, the problem, and that he's not going to put any more money into the schools until they can, break this lock that the unions apparently have on teachers, and that the unions are all about, protecting teachers and not helping kids. And that's an argument that, it is what it is, but it just seems, in my experience, it just seems that the education budget, and that's why, the voters overwhelmingly supported the 55% the state's going to pay for. Well, it never happens because people in Augusta just never make it happen.
Well, it almost happened before the recession. I think they got over 50. And then the world fell apart, and there was a lot of federal money came in to help support schools, so the state's share really dipped pretty low.
Yeah, and it depends on the revenues. I mean, if we're going to reduce income tax, but we're going to make up for it with these increased revenues because of what's going on in the economy, and there's money around, sure, we might get more education funding.
And LePage has said we're going to have the income tax cuts.
Yeah.
He's going to propose, we're going to offset it with cuts in spending.
What are you going to cut?
In that frame, how do you find more money for schools and more money for anything else?
Well, that's why I think that his budget's a non-starter.
Right.
If you're just going to whack the income tax and not
and get
squeeze,
he'll get none of it
services
because he won't have consulted with anybody in advance, and he'll just drop it on everybody, and we'll have the same sort of mess we had last year. But I think education is something on the campaign trail that everyone says we ought to spend more on, and nobody does it. when they get there. I mean, that's. I'm interested in what the governor's now saying about overturning the minimum wage, and there's another illustration where just as you pointed out on education, where the no side said, well, it's just a little. Well, we're all in favor of raising the minimum wage, of course.
Well, that was right around.
I believe we were 5 for 5.
Yeah,
I think the no's all said that they favored the general thrust of the question.
But it's just the way it's being done.
I think on minimum wage, it was right around the time the signatures got certified.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, everybody was for a minimum wage.
Wait a minute, aren't you the guys that have been fighting every increase, every indexing proposal in minimum wage for decades?
Right.
Why weren't you reasonable then? Why didn't you agree to $10 when you had a chance to do it? We wouldn't have had a referendum. It's all malarkey to me. It's just campaign rhetoric.
So it's interesting about the referendums because the governor took time during the swearing in, the most formal, the time when nobody freelances, nobody ever feels the need to add anything to the ceremony, with an attack on 2 of the referendums, including the minimum wage. And he said in other forums that people didn't know what they were voting on. I was looking at, a lot of people voted for questions 1 through 4 who apparently didn't vote for president. It looks like there were 36,000 votes more for the 4 presidential candidate. I mean, for the legalized marijuana question than there were for the 4 presidential candidates combined. Both, if you combine the yes and no, and if you combine the yes and no on the minimum wage, there was another like 15,000 more votes. So people apparently had some idea what they were voting on and why they were going to the polls, and left the top line blank.
I love the governor's quote in the Thursday paper that we have to respect the will of the voters.
Yes,
but what?
Well, and then
but not their intelligence.
Yeah. If they vote in support of what positions he's taken, of course he opposed all of these referendums and he got whacked on all of them.
Well, and then he
People
makes
didn't agree with him, so that's the way it goes. They don't agree with you.
the link between the minimum wage and it's going to, devastate the elderly. I mean, just out of the blue, I think, tries to create fear among Maine's senior citizens that somehow this minimum wage bill is their biggest enemy. And there's absolutely no evidence of that
it
whatsoever.
also wades into this whole phenomenon of fake news, because there's a lot of fake news embedded in that warning, such as, where does this 350,000 elderly people figure come from? I've looked and looked.
It's not from the census, I'll tell you that. It's about 100,000.
Yeah. So, I actually dove into that, saying, okay, well, he must have gotten that number from somewhere. And to the best I can conclude, he didn't. he just came up with it.
It seemed about right.
Yet that's now the operative phrase out there behind the effort to amend this referendum is, we're going to put 350,000 elderly Mainers into not just poverty, but deep poverty, whatever that is.
Right.
And it's an example of what's happening. I mean, it's always happened. We've always had spurious claims, but that's, I think, very symptomatic of what's going on right now in terms of messaging and political messaging.
I don't know why the immediate response isn't that the real number is that more children have entered into deep poverty, that is defined as a family making less than $10,000 under LePage, than anyone else. Like, it seems to me like people armed with the real facts could counter what LePage says, but he's just got a platform like no other, because he says outrageous things. Everybody covers what he says. He doesn't care if it's true.
Right.
But there are ways to counter. It's just there's nobody there to do it.
And I've seen that 350,000 number at least half a dozen times in the last couple of weeks in various platforms. So yeah, you're right. It's out there. And how many times do you call fake news before people stop paying attention to it? I think in some cases, people never stop paying attention to it. That's what they're going to believe, and they're sticking with it.
Right. Right. So people say they don't like the mainstream media because they find it biased. and then they flock to these sites that are like intentionally the most biased sites you could possibly imagine. And let's say I can't trust the Wall Street Journal, but I trust whatever
Trump
Inc. Trump. So as a journalist, how do you do that? How do you deal with people talking about false facts and emotional truths turned into statements of fact that aren't true?
The most obvious way to deal with it is to document the fact, not just say it's untrue, but document the fact that it's untrue. Come up with tangible evidence that shows that this, as you said, there aren't even that many people to support that claim.
And some of them are rich.
Yeah, right.
And some of them will be getting $12 an hour.
The bigger problem, and we can do that, and we can do that until we're blue in the face. The bigger problem is conveying that message to the people who stand to be convinced, and I think that's the dilemma that all so-called mainstream media face right now. Is you can keep speaking the truth over and over and over again, but if you're dealing with a significant segment of the population that has tuned you out because across the board they don't think anything you say is true, then you have more than just a messaging problem. You have a marketing problem because you're not reaching those people. And boy, I think that's the dilemma right now.
And the marketing problem is for who? For the media or for the people who are trying to...
The media.
Yeah.
Broadening the audience, finding a way to grow the audience and bring people back into the audience who have voluntarily departed in favor of echo chambers that are more suitable to their beliefs.
Willful ignorance is a hard thing to paddle. It's if someone doesn't want to be convinced of the truth, they don't want to know the truth. I think that's a dilemma that this new world of social media, I think, faces. Although I see it kind of cresting now with companies. Really, I think power now lies, for the most part, in corporate America to face some of these huge problems. And Facebook, Google, Apple, these companies that have the capacity to not only filter news but to reach millions of people. Twitter elected Donald Trump. I think that those companies now are becoming sensitive to the fact that they are like the shucksters of fake news, and they're trying to tweak their algorithms, even though it might cost them some money. You had statements from Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook and companies like Google saying that they're going to try to do more to filter out fake news. So maybe we're turning a corner. I hope so.
I think some of it can be managed that way, but there was a story on Thursday in NPR about a guy in Texas who took a photograph of some buses lined up outside of a Trump rally, and reported that other people who were in the rally had been bussed in. It went all around the world immediately.
And it was for an unrelated convention.
It turned out it was buses for a convention, and he eventually confirmed that he was wrong. But by that time, 250,000 outlets had covered it. So it's hard to see a filter that would have blocked that. It was a YouTube thing. So I think, to me, the deeper problem is that we have a growing part of the population that gets its news online, on the internet, and not from any news sources at all.
On Twitter or YouTube.
They get it in what used to be rumor, what used to be crazy talk, is now being packaged as news.
Right.
And so I think it's an audience problem, that people who are getting their information almost exclusively from the internet are people that we can't rely on to make good decisions in a democracy. So we've got to find a way to get. I don't know what the answer is, but it's a tough problem.
Well, one answer I think is demonstrated recently in the story of the scary story of the guy who, came up from North Carolina and went into the pizza place with a gun because he had heard that there was a child sex ring going on that was, influenced by Hillary Clinton. Well, my nephew was actually in D.C. at the pizza place, and, they had to run out of there. And I think the reporting on that was really good. It showed
Did you see the quote that he gave to the New York Times?
Yeah.
My intel on that wasn't 100%.
But the guy, I mean,
it's probably generally true. Yeah.
but I'm sorry. The
Quote of
more
the
we
week.
report on people responding to fake news and doing really stupid things, I think the more people are going to question, like, oh my God, that is ridiculous. You got to report on it.
My favorite tweet on that was somebody said, if this isn't an issue, why are so many people talking about it?
I think part of the response, and columnists who aren't journalists like me and Cynthia, I think have an opportunity to confront that phenomenon in a different way, which is, it's hard to confront ignorance with facts because some people prefer ignorance. It's hard to confront emotion with logic and policies and programs, and it just sort of goes back to the conversation of Paul LePage. I mean, I think stupid things have to be called stupid. And people who won't take the time to inform themselves but want to vote have to be called out.
I agree.
Also, I think people ultimately are going to change their minds when the truth lands at their doorstep. And that can go to a lot of the promises that Trump has made, for example. There will come a time in the next 4 years when a significant number of Trump supporters are going to wake up and say, wait a minute.
Where's my Obamacare?
What happened to my health insurance? Where's the wall?
Where's the factory being rebuilt?
Why is the factory in, Youngstown or wherever still rusting? I mean, these things do have a shelf life, and I think that if there are a lot of people out there who have really significant expectations that are built on these false facts, see down the road that those expectations aren't realized, there will be a backlash. The question is, how will it manifest itself in the midterm election, in the next presidential election?
But we felt that way about LePage too.
Right.
And it turned out that he didn't deliver on any of the things he said he was going to do. But it was okay. People, just didn't blame him for it. It was he was seen as out there fighting.
It was the legislature's
He was
fault.
fighting for them, right? And
right. And that's where people, I think, underestimate Paul LePage and his ability to deflect and his ability to assign blame to anyone but himself, much like our incoming president. So.
The one thing, though, I think that Paul LePage is going to confront, hopefully, is that, when he was elected, I think so many people are still suffering the effects of the recession. And that, coupled with international terrorist threats, have people afraid. And I think when people are afraid, leaders like Trump and LePage, who just, radiate strength and sort of machismo stuff, are appealing because they're protector-like. But, the economy's on the upswing. We're seeing, I think, the United States obviously has some issues internationally, but for the most part, the economy is strong. The stock market is soaring. So there might be different, economics for people. They won't be as afraid, maybe, in 2 years.
So from the national, international scale, let's go really, really local. There's been some excitement in Portland this week with the mayor and the city council and a kind of crazy power struggle between the elected mayor, Ethan Strimling, and the city manager, John Jennings. And, from a distance, you look at Portland and you think, what's there to fight about? Things look pretty good. There's some healthy development. There's certainly some serious problems. Gentrification is a problem, but it's certainly not as bad a problem as the opposite of gentrification. I don't know what the good word for that is. Disinvestment. We don't have whole neighborhoods getting vacant houses and being bulldozed. We have an affordable housing problem. There's a lot of pressure at the homeless shelter, but it could be worse. Anyway, Portland's a pretty healthy place, but there's this big fight going on about whether or not the mayor is really running the city or the city manager. And do we have any advice for any of the protagonists?
I think so much of this is wrapped up in personalities. I think it's major aspect of it. My favorite was the reader commenter who demanded to know this morning who paid for those fig leaves.
Right. The olive branches, please. No, they were fully clothed.
Did the taxpayers pay for those olive branches? Where did he get those anyway?
Yeah, where do you get olive branches? I should have asked him.
Really?
Yeah.
O'Donnell's?
But how do we know there really were olive branches?
But this is a personality clash, and I think that especially with Ethan's trim, when you're dealing with a guy who has a, shall we say, outsized personality that has certainly served him well in some cases and served him not so well in others. I think he certainly, when he was in the state senate, learned the limitations of his personal charisma, and I think that's happening right now too, where a lot of the backlash, I think, seems to be directed at him personally, and at the fact that he's, I don't know, too big for his britches, or all sizzle, no steak, whatever you want to call it. But if my advice to him would be to tone that down right now, because it's a battle he's clearly not winning. I mean, he has a couple of new allies on the council in terms of the councilors he supports.
Allegedly, I mean,
we think.
But they haven't said that they're
right. And at some point, I think they're going to start resenting that characterization.
Yeah.
So at some point, I think he needs to just realize that, he's not. If this is a power struggle with the city manager, he's not going to win it on his personality. It's not happening for him right now.
I think that's true, but we were saying some of the same things about Mike Brennan later in his term. His struggle was with the council more than the manager. So I think underneath that there's a structural problem, and that there was a compromise that finally was put together from the side that wanted a mayor and the side that didn't, that essentially created
a weak mayor with a big mayor salary.
That's right. And imagine if the framers of the Maine Constitution had created a governor who, but also had a state manager who managed all of state government. But there was a governor.
Is it too late to do that?
Right. Yeah. There's some merit.
That sounded bad.
But imagine what kind of chaos you would have through the first 5 or 10 governors as they tried to wrangle for what power do I really have? I ran thinking I could be emperor, and now I'm in a broom closet, and I had to beg for one staff, and I can't talk to any of the town employees. I mean, I think there is that underlying structural flaw that the city will resolve in one of two ways. Either there'll be fights for the next 5 mayors, and they'll finally resolve something, and everybody running for mayor will know what it is, or that system's going to be scrapped in favor. You either have a mayor. I mean, even calling it a mayor. Right. Is a problem. You either have a mayor, as most people understand the term, or you don't. Right. But to create this, we used to have a mayor who was really the chair of the council. It was a ceremonial, and we sort of elevated that a little, but not really very much. I mean, I'm not defending either the first 2 mayors, but that's a tough job to walk into.
There's so few political jobs that pay a living wage. And there's a lot of people who are passionate about politics for the right reasons and want to move. The thing about Maine, it's just, you feel like there's nowhere to go if you have ambition to do big things, if you have big ideas, or you want to, try big things. There's nowhere to go in Maine. So the mayor's position is attractive to somebody like Ethan, who has a lot of energy, a lot of passion, a lot of ideas, pays a decent salary so you can actually, live and do what you love to do. But then there's not a lot to do. And I don't understand the prohibition of him speaking to staff. That strikes me as very dysfunctional. Like if the mayor of Portland can't speak to the staff, I mean, that's a problem.
I think there was a good example in this morning's Press Herald story of that, where he had apparently scheduled a meeting with a city employee, and it turned out that employee had a grievance pending against the city. And so, from a labor law standpoint, I can certainly understand, you know this better than I, but I can see where that could be problematic. If the guy's got a grievance against the city and he's having that formal conversation through the union with the city, and then at the same time he's having these back channel talks with the mayor, I can see where, as city manager, I'd say, hold the phone. That we can't do that.
Absolutely, but why would the mayor not know that? I don't know. There's some structural issues that have to get worked out.
It seems like the mayor could pick up the phone, or when somebody calls, the mayor could pick up the phone just like any of us could, without causing any legal liability, right? I mean, that sanitation worker doesn't work for the mayor. I think they sent the smartest people in town into a room for a year, and they came up with this system. So I hate to pull the plug on it so quickly, but I think they anticipated that the mayor and the city manager would be getting along.
Which gets back to the whole personality.
Why wouldn't they?
But from a management standpoint, again, it's like the president of the chairman of the board and the CEO.
Right.
So the CEO has the job of running the operation. Everyone reports to the CEO. And so now what happens if the chairman starts meeting with the division heads, and what happens, unintentionally or otherwise, if the chairman starts to say, I think you should do this, or I think you should do it in this way. Now,
and that runs counter to what
the CEO said. Right. Now you have a catastrophic problem. So this is
problem for the CEO, but it's not necessarily a problem for the organization.
Well, it might be for all the people working in the organization who then don't know who they're actually responsible for. I mean, it creates a chaos, I think, in any structure that, in every small town in Maine, and certainly the one we live in, my wife was on the town council. Councilors don't talk to members of the city staff.
No. I mean, I was on the town council for Cape Elizabeth for 3 years, and geez, I would pick up the phone and call Ernie McVeigh all the time. I mean,
to get information.
Just everything,
maybe,
to try to understand. There was no prohibition, but what I think Ethan Strimling did that was unfortunate for him is he underestimated how powerful John Jennings is and how strong he is. I mean, he's a good manager, and he's gotten a lot done, and he's very savvy politically. And I think Mayor Strimling underestimated the strength of the manager.
I think more than the personalities, I think the weakness in the system is that all the mayor's power comes from the council. Even though he's elected independently, the council has to sort of cede power to the mayor for him to have any. And so far, we're 2 for 2. They don't want to do it. And if the mayor is looking to play a bigger role, he needs to have a majority of the council on his behind his back, and he needs to be able to go to the manager and say, "I have 5 votes to fire you if you don't let me talk to the police chief now and then," and that's the kind of thing that that could change the dynamic, but. Because of the personalities involved, Ethan appears to have alienated the entire council.
Correct.
Just amazing, actually.
And so it's funny. He campaigned against Brennan, saying that he was was winning with 5-4 votes. And this was somehow he was failing to engage the entire council. 8-1. yeah, on the losing end.
Right, exactly.
So,
and I think the other obvious thing is that Ethan. Prior to becoming mayor, has demonstrated how adept he can be at his use of media.
Yes.
And that's something that I think is somewhat foreign to some members of the council. I mean, certainly individually, they're not used to going out and calling their own press conferences and beating the drum. They tend to do their work in City Hall, and they tend to do it fairly quietly. That's not to say there isn't media present when they do it, but they don't have big drums. They don't bang on them, and that's what Ethan does. And if you have someone with that type of that manner of getting things done, and you plunk him into a group like those at City Hall, you can see where there's going to be trouble. They just don't like it. They don't like picking up the paper in the morning and seeing something that they've been working on for months and months has suddenly been trashed by the mayor. It doesn't sit well politically with them.
So that could be an opportunity for him to shine some of that spotlight on them.
Exactly.
Help them use his access to the other media to bring them along.
The olive branches. That's what
The olive. You think that was a nice touch?
I don't know where I got fig leaf, but
Yeah.
I'd like to say it was a
standing there.
Freudian slip.
dual purpose.
Well, okay, so we figured out the legislature, we figured out the City Hall, White House. Maybe we'll leave that for next time. I think that we'll say goodbye.
See you later.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Portland Press Herald podcast. For more episodes in this series and other podcasts, visit pressherald.com/podcasts. To read more from our panelists, visit pressherald.com/opinion. And don't forget, if you're not subscribed on iTunes on your iOS device, you can visit the iTunes store and search for Press Herald to subscribe to the Press Herald podcast. Thanks very much for joining us.